Thank you, Mr. Chairman. HR 5859 would wrongly incentivize more oil and gas drilling on our public lands, claiming that a small portion of revenues will go to fund education. I heard this time and time again when I was on the council and a mayor in a small town where an oil company wanted to come and drill along the California coastline. They promised us the world. We were going to get a new school, we're going to get all these police officers, and the one thing that the community said was, we don't want to deal with the health impacts and open up the coastline to drilling. Simply put, more oil and gas drilling is not the answer to helping fund our schools and protect the health of our children. Children are particularly susceptible to the health impacts from oil and gas pollution, which has created a public health crisis, leaving them suffering from asthma and respiratory problems, nosebleeds, and nausea. I believe we should be looking to protect homes and schools from oil and gas development, not linking school funding to additional drilling. That is why we should be supporting efforts to increase setbacks and distances between oil and gas operations and protected areas like schools and homes. To help achieve that, I've introduced a bill called the No Drilling in Our Backyards Act, which would ensure that any oil and gas drilling operation on public lands inside the United States occurs at least 1,500 feet away from homes, schools, healthcare facilities, and other protected areas. Now, my bill would begin to alleviate the many symptoms that frontline communities experience daily, working to ensure that every person has a right to clean air and healthy communities. Ms. Ripple, what sort of setbacks from oil and gas wells does Pennsylvania have for homes and schools and businesses, and do you think those are large enough?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for your leadership on this legislation. We have 500 to 1,000 feet, and all of the health research that I've seen thus far, peer-reviewed health research, indicates this is not sufficient. We are seeing certainly effects that are documented. Again, this is peer-reviewed research that indicates these vulnerable populations, and very specifically our children, are facing these adverse health conditions and adverse health outcomes within half a mile. So 1,000 feet, quite simply, is not sufficient. 500 feet is somewhat laughable in certain cases, and I want to testify very directly that what I see happening in southwestern Pennsylvania, a lot of times we get trapped air, essentially inversions. Everybody, I think, here understands inversions from out west and also from out east. That air mass close to industrial operations traps those pollutants. So if children are in close proximity to these operations, they are breathing that much more air. It does not disperse, and it is particularly problematic in the evening hours and in the early morning hours. The children can't be out playing. We see the oil and gas operations behind their playgrounds. It just simply is not an appropriate use of nearby adjacent lands to our schools. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I couldn't agree more. When this oil company was trying to come to drill in our town, I lived about, I think, 500 feet from the site. The oil company spent money to try to get voters to think that I wouldn't be able to vote on the issue because I lived too close. And they took me out to a tour to one of their other facilities. Of course, when I showed up, there was not a whole lot going on, but I went back unannounced. And you could smell it in the air, and you could talk to people walking down the streets, and they would tell you about the health impacts and even the mental health impacts from the smell and the odor. And it's just astonishing to me. And some people say, well, where'd you get 1,500 feet from? Well, one of my colleagues, I was at an event, I met a council member in Dallas, Texas, where you think they know just a little bit about oil drilling in Dallas. And he says, we have a requirement that is 1,500 feet, not just for health and safety, but for property values. And I said, well, geez, that sounds pretty reasonable. If Dallas, Texas can do it, we should be able to do it. And it's astonishing to me how sometimes some of my colleagues say, there is no health impacts from oil drilling. And I have been in this committee and I've heard that. And it's been pretty shocking. Can you speak to some of how the health impacts of oil and gas drilling change as people live closer to these wells?
Again, what I wanted to emphasize is that there is a certain dispersion factor, and I think the closer you get to the air pollution, and in some cases the water pollution, the more likely you are to suffer these adverse health outcomes, acute, and ultimately it's going to be chronic. We're talking about benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene. We're talking about formaldehyde. These are things that are known to be carcinogenic, and there is a massive amount of particulate matter pollution which is occurring. Again, these are things that are documented. These are things that are really well understood in the medical literature. So it absolutely gets worse the closer you get, and especially when you're in such close proximity to such a site that there is no sense of clearing. There is no sense that you ever escape these toxic emissions.
Right. Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman